I've been beta testing iZotope Ozone 10 since June 2022. Over the years, iZotope have solidified Ozone as a solid suite of really well-developed DSP. But I also think since Ozone 8, many of us have felt that the money on another update might not be justified. And I'm here to help you gain clarity on that decision. So we're going to go into each of the 4 new DSPs in Ozone 10 and share slightly more advanced knowledge on what they're actually doing. If you're familiar with Ozone, this is just going to help you understand it one step further, and if it's your first time looking at the Ozone suite, you're going to be starting from a great knowledge bank of information to pull from. First up has to be the addition of the soft clipper in Maximizer. This is new DSP they've developed and it is incredible. Wait until you see the transfer curve and how it's operating. Now, many users have been asking for this in the Ozone suite. They've added it and they've done an incredible job at it. It's replaced my FabFilter Pro L2 in all-round mode and my standard clip for blending between hard clipping and soft clipping, because the transfer curve is incredible. Let's look at this soft clipper in action. So you've got your normal maximizer and they've added this module here. You turn on your soft clipping. Now, this is the beauty of it. It enables this soft clipper pre-limiting. So you've got, it's actually a little bit interesting they put this on the right-hand side because technically in the chain, it's clipping pre-limiting. And this is really important because that's how we use clippers as a mastering engineer. I clip before my limiter, so that way I have more headroom when I'm pushing into my limiter and it's not pumping as much. And I can show you an example of that quickly before I show you the other features. So let's say the threshold's -9. On a 6 decibel signal, there's going to be some limiting happening there. 2.3 decibels of limiting. Now, that's because the soft clipper's on. If I turn this soft clipper off, the limiter has to do 3 decibels of limiting. So what this soft clipper is doing is it's clipping before the limiter, buying you some headroom, so that means you can end up pushing the signal a little bit hotter into your limiter without it necessarily pumping or working as hard. So that's a really good feature of it, or the way they've laid it out ergonomically and workflow-wise. Now, moving forward with this, you've got light, medium, and heavy mode. So at the moment, the nominal signal is 6 decibels, okay? I'm running a sine wave of 107 hertz at 6 decibels. Now, the light mode starts clipping the signal at 3 decibels below the threshold. So if the threshold's 6 decibels, it's starting its transfer curve between not clip signal and soft clip signal at 9 decibels. So I can show you that here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring this down 3 decibels, okay? So technically it should be clipping at 6 decibels, and as soon as I go below 3, all the clipping disappears. Then I go above 3 and it starts to slowly, that's that transfer curve that they use for this soft clipper, is to slowly bring in that soft clipping up and until the point where it's doing its full soft clip at the threshold. So with that understood, you can replicate that between light, which is 3 decibels below the threshold. Medium is actually 9 decibels below the threshold, which is pretty aggressive, but I could see some instances of using that like on a drum bus or something to get a bit of tone. And then you got the heavy mode, which if you like trap music and really getting stuff nasty and gnarly, that clips 30 decibels below the threshold. That was actually really difficult for me to understand, not understand to say, because it is just so much clipping, but they've done a good job at integrating it. And soft clipper 25% is typically where I'm using it, 0 to 25, and it just gives enough. And I'm going to show you exactly this same setting I've got dialed in here on standard clip. Now, this is where the magic really, it's taken me by storm. So standard clip here, 25% soft saturation transfer curve, 3 decibels below the signal, so -9 decibels it's clipping, so it's only technically clipping the 3 decibels below 6, as is Ozone, and that's the amount of harmonics that just spread all the way up to the top. Now, you look at Ozone, okay, we'll get rid of standard clip, and we'll look at Ozone. Look at that, it just rolls off nicely, and we're going to play back something here for you to listen to because you hear it straight away. It just sounds more open, more clean, there's more dynamics to it, and it's the same volume and it's the same amount of soft clipping. It's just this curve they've been able to transfer. And if you're wondering what I'm saying when I'm saying transfer curve, it's actually this curve here. So it's the transfer between soft clipping and flattening the tops of it. So that's actually just the curve and the way they've programmed that. That's like advanced digital signal processing beyond my capabilities. They've been able to program into that. Now let's actually take a listen to what's going on here, because this is wild. So I've got Slab City, I Want More. It's a banging track. I've got a few bars here playing with the standard clip and then a few bars after it playing with Ozone 10's maximizer with the soft clip enabled at 50% and 50% on the other one, so you can really hear the effect of it. Now take a listen to this. Now, in regards to the maximizer, I always wondered what the actual measurable difference between each of the IRC algorithms were, and it's going to require a whole video in of itself, but Bill Podolak, the product manager, sent me this pattern alongside with some other technical documentation to look over, so expect a video on that. When I was chatting with him, he clarified that IRC4's transient mode is actually built on IRC3's pattern. The classic mode is built on IRC's 1 algorithm, and the modern mode is built on IRC2's algorithm. The only difference between IRC4 is that it uses spectral shaping ahead of the psychoacoustic modeling each of these IRC algorithms use. And to fill in some of the gaps I've left out here, here's Bill in a chat I had with him talking about the IRC module and how it actually operates and works.
It's, the audio limiter system that we've developed is something proprietary that's very cool. And when I go and talk to pro mastering engineers using Ozone, that's typically, one of their go-tos, and that's the IRC3 and IRC4 transient mode in the Ozone maximizer. And what's really neat about IRC3 is that it's very low distortion and also very high CPU, but that cost kind of comes for a reason, because what it's doing is actually running multiple limiters all in parallel, and they have different characters, which in the maximizer is a combination of attack, release, and look ahead time. And what it will do is look at all of those different limiters running with different characters, and it will measure the distortion in each of those. And it will select the one that is the fastest, but has the amount of distortion that is psychoacoustically under the threshold of hearing. And so then it will, based on the content of the signal, switch between those different algorithms to provide the fastest one where the distortion is psychoacoustically not audible. Pretty neat stuff.
The Impact module features completely new DSP to Ozone and way of thinking of dynamics processing, or way of approaching or accessing it. I honestly have only begun scratching the surface of what's capable with this, even though I've been using it since the beta. And Bill Podolak, the product manager for iZotope, shared this paper with me, which Shahan, the principal research scientist at Ozone, presented at the International Conference of Digital Audio Effects on September 9th in Vienna. That would have been on Friday. Now, in simple terms, it's a dynamics processor without the need for a threshold that manipulates the top 5% of dynamic information by the way of calculating a gain trace based off LDR calculations and user input to either expand or compress its relative microdynamic information. That's a lot of jargon for people to understand. And to be honest, I'm not sure if I completely understand everything going under the hood, but for a more in-depth look at this, I'm going to be planning to have a call with Shahan and piece together some of my own user research and document it here on my YouTube channel for you all. So please subscribe to the channel, and I'm actually going to walk you through what this plugin is doing rather than just try to confuse this shit out of you. So let's have a look at setting up the Impact module. You can have it as a full band Impact module where it changes the microdynamics, either expanding or compressing the whole signal. You can add in a second band, a third band, or have 4 bands across it. What's important to know is these sliders is what affects the sound. You either expand up or compress down. What's more important to understand, which is something I'm not too crazy about in the design, is that it goes 0 to 100. Now, what is 100? Well, 100 is actually 9 decibels on this unit, and 9 decibels of compression or 9 decibels of expansion. So if you use some basic arithmetic at 50, the most it's going to do is about 4.5 decibels, and I can just show you that in action quickly here. make an amendment here because I got a response from Bill Podolak on what that parameter is actually doing. And basically the decibel I noted is the maximum, the amount that the DSP could possibly change the signal, but that doesn't mean it is actually what it'll do. For example, the stabilizer, you need to run a signal like white noise in it to see the maximum 9 dB amount of boosting. For most signals, you can turn it up all the way and not see 9 dBs, so we thought it'd be confusing to label it that way. That makes better sense now, and back to the video. So you sort of have an idea of how many decibels you could potentially be expanding or potentially be compressing. That means there is one little workflow flaw with Impact. You have to, actually it shouldn't be a workflow flaw because you should be doing this anyway regardless, but you have to be very careful you gain stage into the Impact module. If your mix is at -1 decibel true peak and then you expand it, let's say 3 decibels or 4 decibels or whatever, it's going to clip. And I've experienced that in the beta testing. It isn't good when it's clipping because it's just hard clipping, cutting the signal off. So make sure you gain stage into the Impact module and you have enough headroom for however much expansion you're trying to do. Compression isn't really an issue because it's going down, but that's one thing to understand. You have a delta mode here, so you can actually hear what's pumping out or like either punching out or getting compressed down, so you can hear the difference. And then you can either sync it to your session's tempo to have it pump in time with the tempo, or you can get rid of the sync and just use regular milliseconds. Now, with the delta mode, there's sort of one little design feature which is intentional, and I'm not sure why it's intentional, but let's say you're soloing the upper mids, okay? We're soloing the upper mids. And while we're soloing the upper mids, we want to add a little bit more expansion to the upper mids. But we don't know, we want to hear how much of that expansion is being introduced. If we hit the delta mode, what we actually end up hearing is the low mid, and the high mid. And so I'm not sure why that's intentionally doing that, because I'm pretty sure the developers are aware of it. But just one thing, if you want to monitor the delta signal, make sure you're monitoring everything. You're not just soloing and then deltaing. Now let's actually look at me using this, because this is going to be important. Oh, also, quick thing I missed, majority of the DSP modules have an amount slider in Ozone 10, and that basically goes 100%, everything's in effect, and then it just scales up and down the main parameters which are adjusting the audio. Now let's have a listen to this mix, and I'm going to just play around with it to get this sounding different, I guess, because I actually really like this mix. I just want to see how we can manipulate it using this Impact module in opposition to normal compression. Cool, could have a bit more sub because it's quite hissy up the top. Let's just get a bit crazy there. Cool, all right, take a listen to that. Let's just do these 2 bars here. Or not 2 bars, let's just do these 2 seconds here. So you're probably wondering what those lines are doing down there. It's actually a visual representation of how much it's changing the gain of each of those bands. So each of those lines, the blue line is the low end, the purple line is the low mids. If there was any orange line, which there shouldn't have been, that'd be in the upper mids, and the white line is the top end. So it's a really powerful tool to just manipulate the microdynamics of audio, and I think you can understand why. Sometimes the smallest little features can solve the biggest of problems, and every now and then at the studio I get thrown a curveball where the low end of a kick is out to the side, or there's another element, or there's something just baffles me. My brain's having a bit of a brain fart there, because why would you pan a kick? And you try using an elliptical filter to try and narrow it in, but there's stereo information there, and it's just hard to rebuild the original feel of that mix. And the result is always compromised, because the original tone had certain phasing and certain relationships in the side signals that was otherwise there and present in the original mix. Now, they've added a feature here to their imager. It's called Recover Sides. And I'll be honest, this is one module where I'm not quite understanding of the DSP that's going on behind here, but it actually enables you to recover the side information you fold back in and place it back in the center. And I don't know how it works, but I'm somewhat impressed by it. It's not the most perfect solution to a bad mix, but it works. And the thing is, I'm going to show you something a little bit different. I'm not going to actually show you this in mastering, because I haven't been using it a great deal in mastering. I've been using it somewhere else. I've been using it in mixing. So I've been actually using it in mixing to carve out the tones and where they're sitting in the stereo field, and any information I'm bringing back into the center, I'm recovering the side information, and I'm able to get these really lush, wide sounds without ruining, like destroying the tone of the original production. And that's something that always happens when it comes to any widening plugins, even mid-side EQ. Everything breaks apart. So here's what I got. I've got a build-up guitar, I've got dreamy keys, a mellow pad, some reverse keys, and another synth pad there. So this is what the section sounds like. Just play this section here. Beautiful. It's just beautiful layers there, beautiful layers. What I've done is, and I'm going to play this before and then it's going to go into here where it bypasses all the images. What I've done is I've taken some notes of where the main energy for each element is. So this guitar is about 1 to 10 kilohertz, that pluckiness it gets up to. The harp keys 400 to 1 kilohertz, the pad synth 400 to 1.5. Anyway, I've just basically said, where is the energy of each of these tracks? Obviously some of these are already panned, so I want to maintain those relationships, but there are other elements in there I can spread. And what I've done is, let me go over to here. So let me show you one by one what each of these images are doing, and then I'll play you the before and after. So this guitar main, I really like the top end, the stereo spread there, so I just add a little bit more here. Now what it's doing when it's widening here, it's just a mid-side matrix. It's nothing special. You see it in BX Digital, it's just widening. However, this mid-range of it, there's a lot of other information I wanted in the stereo field, like these panned synths that sort of take up that space. Those two melody pan synths and the reverse one sort of takes up the mid-range. So I didn't want these guitars chewing up that space in the stereo field. Okay, so I wanted the mids of the guitar down the center, the mids of the synths out the side. So I pulled it down, but what happens when I pulled it down, I'll get rid of recover sides, is that it loses some of its energy and information. Take a listen to this. So first I'll play it in with that off. So basically I've been able to blend some of that information I lost when I folded that slightly down the center, that mid-range in the center. And what I've done is, in terms of a mixing technique, I just went through each channel, boosted where I wanted a bit more width, narrowed and compensated for the recover sides where I needed to make that part of the image a bit more in the center. And I just went through each channel and sort of boosted where I needed to and pulled away where I didn't based on the frequency ranges. Now listen to this before and after. It's pretty wild what ends up happening. I'll be honest, I haven't been using the recover sides a whole lot in mastering. However, in mixing, especially when I've got layers and layers of synths or guitars and lots of information where I need to sort of pass out what needs to be in the stereo field, what has to be in the mid, and be very selective about which frequencies are out there, which frequencies are in the middle, the recover sides function has saved my ass, because when I've had to fold things back into the middle, I haven't lost the tone, the integrity of the original sounds. The stabilizer is a feature I'm often digging into to spot check when I finish dialing in a master. It's an adaptive, intelligent EQ which works to dynamically shape the tone of a mix by way of actively matching the dynamic EQ targets which have been generated inside of Ozone 10 when they were developing it. So let's actually go over what's happening here. So first things first, we'll go top left down. You've got different styles here. Now each of these styles, what they've done during the development of Ozone 10 is taken the top 10 like cinematic soundtracks, the top 10 country records, the top 10 EDM records. It's created an average of those spectral shapes and then programmed it into the stabilizer. So for this song I've got here, it's On My Skin by Daniel Tonic. It's an EDM song. You can either work it in shape mode. So when it's in shape mode, it is going to both make dynamic EQ movements plus, so it's going to expand and compress into that tonal shape. And it's going to try to do it proportionally in even amount. So the amount of boosting it's doing in the low end, it might do cutting in the top end, and then try and create an average curve rather than just doing all cuts or all boosts in order to match that. Now, this amount slider is 100 again, 9 decibels, and 0 again, 0 decibels. So, look, to be honest, I really wish it was decibels just throughout. There must be reasons why it isn't. For me, I just prefer knowing what the dB amount is, whereas 50 is doing 4.5 maximum amount of shaping, because obviously you might already be meeting the curve. The speed at which it does it, the speed at which after it makes that dynamic movement, okay, so after it applies that dynamic EQ, the speed in which it takes to return back to 0. So the smoothing is an interesting one. I can't go into too much detail on in this video, but let's think of it like this as a brief overview. At 100% smoothing, it's 4 multi-band compressors, okay? Four bands of compression looking to match a tonal curve, either in the low mids, the high mids, and whatnot. At 0, it is many bands of compression trying to match a curve. So this is an interesting one. If you've got a track where like it's something, actually it's not something very, when I've been using it, it hasn't been very specific to any style of going 100 smoothing or 0. It's been track dependent and arrangement dependent, because sometimes there's a lot of bass filling up from 0 to 200 hertz, so you don't want to have a very finite amount of smoothing because it starts to sound a bit weird. You go for a more smoother curve. So that one is just to understand a few different bands or many different bands, depending how smooth you make it. Now, the low one is a scale factor of the amount. So the lows are from 100 hertz and down. The mids are from 100 hertz to 5.4 kilohertz, and the highs is everything from 5.4 kilohertz and up. That's really important to understand. Now, this is just a scale, a percentage scale of the amount. Okay, so you can imagine if your amount is at 50, the most amount of gain up or down will be 4.5 decibels, and if you bring the low to 50%, in the lows it will only be a maximum of 2.5 to -2.5. So you can understand what's going on there. Now what I want to do is, I want to dial this in for this track here, because it's a really cool track, it sounds great, and I'm going to show you the before and after, but I've got the EDM curve set. Actually, I missed one feature. I get so excited with this stuff. The cut mode. So instead of shaping, boost, and cut, you can just choose to cut to be adaptive to the what do you call it? Any peaks or resonances. It'll try and smartly and adaptively, dynamically process, so to speak. Now, that's cool. That's cool. I get it. But I don't use the cut mode that much, just because when I have a resonance, when I have a particular frequency that's a bit bitey, I just like to be a little bit more finicky, edit a pre-mastering in terms of either going to the RX suite, find that resonance, get rid of it, or use an EQ like just even the EQ that's in Ozone or FabFilter Pro Q and just notch that out or use a dynamic EQ on that specific frequency. Also, something I hope not to miss is the tame transient mode. Now, it's actually funny, when I was putting this video together, I had never used the tame transient or never found a use for it, but with this actual mix, it actually sounds really good. It gets rid of some of the click and keeps it nice and glued and gelled, which I was surprised for because in sessions I hadn't been using the tame transient mode. So let's have a look at dialing this in.
Remembering the time where I felt your fingers on my skin. Remembering the time where I felt your fingers on my skin. Remembering the time where I felt your fingers on my skin.
Just a small amount, it does a good job at just beefing this up. The tame transient mode definitely helped. And let's move on to the last module. Now, the 4 new DSP innovations which I've showed you are pretty solid, and for a working professional like me who pushes the boundaries of what I'm doing in the studio, the soft clipper and impact module alone give me reason enough to make the Ozone suite a regular feature of my day-to-day workflow. However, the pride and joy of the DSP and the future for Ozone would have to be in the mastering assistant they've developed. No longer is it a little survey that spits you out a preset, but it's a dynamic macro control for the entire plugin. Now, when I was an assistant to a mastering engineer, my role in setting up sessions was packing down, QCing projects, and then after the lead engineer would dial in a master, they'd ask me what I thought. And that's literally how I'm using this mastering assistant. I'll dial in my master with a whole chain, we'll use all my analog gear, and then I'll use the mastering assistant on a new channel to see, well, what does Ozone think? Have I missed anything? Is there anything askew that I could do better? Or is it just pretty much trash and I've done a great job anyway? I don't need the master assistance. Sometimes I love what it's doing. Sometimes I don't. But for the 10 seconds it takes me to capture some audio, process and spit out something on the other end, I'm all the more grateful to have access to a tool like this. And like I said before, this acts as a macro control for the entire plugin. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you something before I actually dial this in. See about this Mac, I've got 16 gig of memory and I've got a relatively old processor, a quad-core i7. Okay, so not super powerful on this computer. However, I have running the Ozone 10 Maximizer, the standard clip, Ozone 10 Impact Module, the stabilizer, and Ozone 10 Insight. Then that's all getting linked up and I'm actually recording this session. Something a lot of users have said is the amount of CPU Ozone uses. So let's see on a pretty old computer, it's not that old, but it's not exactly new, how it actually goes processing and using the master assistant, because this is the most CPU intensive aspect of the Ozone suite. Let's have a look. Okay, so it took about maybe 20 to 30 seconds, not exactly 10 seconds, but it didn't crash and it's working, which is great. So let me show you through it. Okay, so we have our targets on the left. These are the same as the stabilizer, the way they've been programmed. Like I said, they take the top 10 of each genre and they create nodes which create targets that get matched to your audio. You can also, though, which is really cool, add your own mixes in. And I've done this before. You can see I've done it on some albums and stuff where I wanted to just sort of get odds and ends of different songs which don't quite match up. I just wanted to sort of lay them against one another to see what Ozone tells me, because I'll dial it in and then I'll be like, oh, what happens if I get this really dark track and this really poppy track and they're on the same album? What happens if I tone match them? What sort of weird stuff will Ozone do? And then I figure it out from there. So those are the targets there. So now I'll get into the actual macro controls so you understand what's going on. The EQ, that is just simply a percentage slider. So the EQ by default each time is going to be set to around here. And then what you do is you can slide it down, slide it up. You can actually turn off their EQ from in here without actually having to go through the modules, which is really cool. Same with the stabilizer. Typically by default, that stabilizer is at 50%, whatever it dials it into. This is said it's hip hop. It's not hip hop, it's actually EDM. And you can scale it down and up. And just remember, the scale for the stabilizer is 100% is 9 decibels, 50% is 4.5, and then you can work off there. The width match, again, I'm pretty sure that just goes in at 50%, and that's because what the imager is doing when it's matching the stereo field, it's taking the sum difference calculation of the RMS of the mid signal, the RMS of the side signal, and then going, well, the difference between there is 5 decibels of RMS. So we need to, and the target is 6 decibels. So we're going to change it by 1 or whatever it might be. And then it's just setting those curves there. The imager, in terms of the master assistant, the way it lines up is good sometimes because it has some pretty interesting things it does, and there's some happy accidents. And then sometimes it does this where it's just narrowed everything quite a bit for this mix, and I wouldn't be happy if that was on, so I'd probably turn off the imager, and you can just turn it off in the macro view there. The dynamics matching, this is the impact module, and again that's a 0 to 100 slider, which is basically a 0 to 9 dB slider. The loudness, the maximizer, now this is really interesting. You want to keep your ears open for this one. So streaming, it targets -10 LUFS, okay, -10 LUFS and -1 decibel true peak. Okay, DJ player, it changes the true peak to a non-true peak limiting and sets the ceiling to 0.1 and then adds another 2 decibels to the output. So, or takes 2 decibels to the threshold. So what happens is, let's go streaming. If we go over here to maximizer, -1 decibel true peak, 12.6. If I go to DJ player, it's now -14.6 with the 0.1 decibel ceiling. Now, what happens with this slider here? So basically at 100, actually let's put it 0, and remember the figure we've got 14.6. At 100, that should be 18.6, and at -100, it's 10.6. So basically that's 4 decibel of gain up or down with the limiter's threshold. So that's the macro control you're getting from this, and it's pretty powerful stuff if you ask me. What we're going to do is we're actually going to put this in bypass mode and see if it's actually done a good job at creating its own target curve and matching it to an EDM song. I don't know why I think it's hip hop or rap. It does a pretty good job, and you can just see the amount of possibility there is there to manipulate the sound just from this macro view. But what is important is that you do understand what's going on under the hood, so when you're controlling these things, you know, going 100, that's 4 decibels, going -100, that's -4 decibels, or same with the width, or same with the stabilizer, 0 to 9 decibel at 100%. You need to understand how each of these functions work, and that's why I wanted to make this video, so you guys could have a really good understanding of what's happening here with this plugin. Now, one of the privileges of being a beta tester on this is that I've been using it for a long time, and I've seen a lot of things change and happen during that time. So what I've done is I've actually pulled Bill Podolak, the product manager for Ozone 10, onto a call, and you can watch that video over here where we go into what Ozone 10 is, where it's went to, but also, which was super fun, was to go into machine learning, AI, what the future looks like with the technology that's being developed and where it can be taken to. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, take care.